Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Better Events podcast. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co hosts. And in today's episode, we are talking all about timing tips to create a better event. We are going to break this down into 2 episodes. And so, in today, you are going to hear part 1, where we cover a bunch of different things about the beginning of the event process and how you can space out your timing and things like that. So, we're excited to share this information with you. Let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join 2 event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by fellow co-host Mary Davidson. And before we jump into all things timing when it comes to your event, Mary, we've got a conversation starter. This is from our friends at Tourism Richmond. If you haven't listened to their amazing episode we did with their CEO, it's in the show notes. We really enjoyed our visit to Richmond, BC back in the spring, so definitely go check it out. But Mary, what is your top jet lag avoiding tip from our friends at Tourism Richmond?
This is so anti what everyone says. But Logan, I feel like you actually taught me this. You'll have to let me know. Jet lag avoiding tip. If you're tired, take a nap. For example, when I arrive somewhere international, unless it's like 6 p.m. If it's like 6 p.m., I'm going to power through. But if it's any earlier than that, I'm going to take a nap. And it's going to be like an hour or 2 hours. And that just like people I know are going to like deeply disagree with me on that. It has worked for me every time. And every night I sleep like a baby. So I think it works.
I mean, I have to agree with you, Mary. I mean, I think that is one, I probably did mention that of like, yeah, it's like sleep when you're tired. And if you're up, get up. And, if you get an early morning in, I think for me to dovetail, you should definitely do that. But also, especially if you're traveling for work and you have to kind of hit the ground running, like you've arrived and the next day you have to be at work at whatever time zone you're magically in. For me, I guess figure out what anchors you from your morning routines when you're normally at home and do that immediately that next morning. For me, it's like moving my body makes me I get happy endorphins. It just helps me like recenter. And so even if I'm exhausted and a workout doesn't feel like that's something I want to do, taking a walk outside or even walking on the treadmill for 10 minutes, I find just helps like, again, ground you and get you back to everything that, you're supposed to be doing. Because yes, some of these time zones, if it's only an hour or 2, that's not too bad sometimes, but I know even 3 hours can really throw some folks off. So jet lag's no fun. And I guess I will plug though for our listeners in the Pacific Northwest on the West Coast. If you go to Richmond, BC, there is no jet lag because it is also in our same time zone, which is pretty sweet for vacations.
I love that. Yes, I do a little dance every time I have to travel somewhere that's actually in the Pacific Standard Time zone. I'm like, yes, this is going to be easy. So love it. Great conversation starter. And everybody, before we get into our episode, we want to remind you about the Better Events community. So you can join us on Substack, where we have monthly bonus episodes as well as other content. We have quarterly meetups. We have a Discord channel. We'd love to see you over there. If you've gotten any value from the podcast, that will be a more intimate space for us to chat with you in, and we'd love to invite you to join us there. So be sure to check out that information in the show notes if you have not yet heard of our community. All right. So as you know, we like to transition into why we picked our topic. So today we are talking all about timing tips to create a better event. We love a good pun there. So event timing can feel so tricky, and there's lots of things that you don't know until you do it. And a lot of it's just on paper. And so when like the time comes, you're at the event, you learn a lot of lessons. And so we are going to bring our expertise, our lessons learned to this topic. So we're going to get right into it. And it might feel like an obvious place to start, but Logan, why is timing so important for events?
I mean, it just feels obvious. It just is. It's one of those of like, if you're at a well-timed event, you're probably not going to notice it, but you probably have a horror story of a really poorly timed event that you've been to or experienced where things were running behind, or it starts really late? I mean, anyone can probably think even of a concert. Some concerts like just chronically, historically always start late. And that's something that just is like now a cultural thing with, how those events are run. But it is just so crucial because I think you can control what you can control, but time is one of those things that all of us are kind of synced up to, of knowing what time something needs to start. It's one of those few event elements that planners and attendees are aware of like, oh, my invitation said for my wedding I went to said 3, it's now 3:15. Why are we delayed? That there's just some of that stuff that's pretty obvious to attendees, which, as a planner, there's things I say like we notice as planners, and that's okay if those go wrong. But like timing is just one of those that everyone will notice if something is going over or running behind, whatever it is. Well, then, Mary, do you want to tell your listeners, how do we keep track of timing of things at our events? Like, do you use a timeline? You run a show that, we love talking about? What's your process?
Yeah, those two are the main ones, a timeline, a run of show. So specifically, though, we've started to call them different things. So we have the run of show, of course, which is the production run of show. Email us for a copy of our template. It's our most popular requested item. So happy to send that to you if you'd like. But I like to be clear, like production run of show, like that's really what that is. It could be utilized in other ways as well. But what we make then is a production schedule, which all these words are just it's just jargon. But the other thing that we utilize basically is for specifically the planning team. Nobody else needs to see it because nobody else is going to understand it. But it says very specifically, like 6:30, this vendor arrives. 6:45, we need to go grab this from this room. Like it's really specific in that sense. Nothing to do with the program or the production, but just the execution. So we utilize that, whatever you want to call that document. Those are our main things that we use for timing. Logan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm usually on the production side of things. So I usually have a run a show and a production schedule. Production schedule, yeah, is like crew call time. So what time the crew had to show up, what time our meals are, our breaks, all of that. And then the run a show captures more of what is on screen or on stage, and any attendee breaks and all of that stuff. But having a document that you actually are tracking minute by minute. And this is something that I even have done, Mary, for like my virtual book club that I organized when I first started doing it. I made myself not necessarily run a show, but like kind of just a timeline, bullets on a note on my phone of just kind of roughly how long I wanted things to take. And like, why did I do that, listeners? For something that was so simple is I wanted things to run on time. I wanted to make sure that we got intros in, but we didn't spend too much time on intros, that we didn't get into things about the book. And then there was also like end announcements I wanted to make sure I remembered to make. So that's also the thinking of like why having some kind of timeline, run a show, something, whatever that looks like for you in your event planning process for events, no matter how big or how small. But like, as Mary mentioned, the more complicated the event, the more of these documents you're going to have because they need to kind of cater to each specific need. I think if you work in catering, right, you would call this, it's your BEO, your banquet event order that tells you exactly what time the food needs to be dropped and served and cleared, like all of that. So every aspect of event seems to have something, and we all call it different things, but something that tracks what's happening at what time.
Yeah, and I know we kind of touched on this already, but I've been thinking more as you were just talking from an attendee perspective. If you attend an event, like Logan was saying earlier, you can tell when something has started late, like because you know what time it's supposed to start, so you're like, why? But also during like a program, when I've been an attendee, arguably maybe one of the most important parts of an event during the program, the minute someone, like no matter how wonderful it is, the words that they're sharing, like if they go 5 minutes over, I'm like, they've lost me. It does not matter how good it is. I'm like, I'm ready to go. So I'm just saying, like from an attendee perspective, as we talk about the upcoming like lessons learned and best practices, think of it that way as well, not just as a planning perspective, because I think we've all kind of experienced this before. So I'm excited to get into it.
Mary, we should call out too, then there's also the agenda, which is like your public facing, your outward timing, rough times of when things start. There is a controversial opinion. Some events I've seen don't list exactly what time certain speakers are coming on stage. They just say it's our morning keynote and it's an hour and a half and there's going to be 20 speakers coming across the stage. That's nice because then it's a little less obvious if someone goes long or someone goes short. I will say, though, from having worked as more of the like attendee facing roles for some of those events, it is a little bit of a nightmare because some people want to know, well, what time is this person going on stage? And it's like, I'm not sure exactly. It's going to be in this window, though. If you're in there for the next hour and a half, they will come on stage at some point. And it's just a little harder to, your attendees want details. So, yeah, so this is your agenda. Your event app as well would fall under some of these timing suggestions we're going to give. But Mary, we're going to break down some of these different elements and all the timing things that go into it and just share some of our best practices. So let's start with just total event runtime. Tips for making sure this is successful. Mary, you mentioned about things running over. When you are talking with a client about total event runtime, what are some things you think about?
The biggest situation is obviously what time you need to, it's kind of working back again. Like what time do you need to start? And you usually have to base that on what time do you get access to the venue. So what time can you actually be set and ready? Like everybody be set and ready by. Then what time can you start? How long is it going to take for people to like get the registration? And then like what time do you have to end based on what time you have to be out and load out? And then that's how long your program is going to take. I mean, these are the scenarios at least that I have been in more so. So you take all of that combined and you make a total event runtime. It's hard to just like guess something because I feel like what's really against you the most in that scenario is the venue availability or rental time. So there is a time you have to be in that you have to be out, and you sometimes can't even pay for more because there's somebody else coming in after you. And so you're really basing everything off that. And I think that makes your total event runtime. There's also strategy that goes behind this, of course, like you decide how long you want your content to be and stuff like that. But Logan, what would you add to total event runtime?
Yeah, more the programmatic piece. So like knowing I want to have a 2-hour luncheon. Okay, now, yes, you can factor that in. I mean, this is stuff that you need to take into account even probably before you even book your venue. It is something, though, if you've already booked your venue, like Mary just mentioned, there's so many other parameters that if you're locked into a space, there might be only so much wiggle room you have to shift the duration of your event. Virtually, I would say, when you don't have to think about a venue, it's a virtual platform. I always suggest folks keep it short. Shorter is better than longer. Folks always want you to finish early. And so that's why that run a show, that very specific minute by minute is so helpful and crucial for helping make sure that you land. I joke, it's like you land the plane, you make it right at the right time. And no one has ever been mad if you end 5-10 minutes early. It's usually when you go over that you start to hear feedback, from folks. And then just some of the obvious ones to call out for timing. If budget's of a concern, a one day event's going to cost less usually than a 2-day event. But as Mary alluded to, if you have the space is getting utilized by another person the day after, or maybe the day before your event, think about trying to introduce yourself to that person and see if you can utilize certain things the same, whether it's the same caterer or the same AV vendor, or certain things that you could cost save because they've already loaded it in. They're just going to keep it there and save you both time and maybe some money by reutilizing that. So definitely thinking about your total event runtime. I would also say a cost savings is having less things happening at the same time. So fewer breakout rooms at one time, but maybe the days are longer, meaning you stagger sessions so you can get more sessions in one room versus having 2 rooms going at once, are also just some things to think about and can either help you with budget or help keep your day shorter.
I love it. Those are great tips. And just double tapping, we go back and listen to what Logan just said about if you have the space and reaching out to the event that has it before you and see if you can share things. We were part of an event and learned a hard lesson about that specific situation. We ended up knowing the planner, but didn't know that we knew them until after the event. And so it would have saved a lot of hassle for everyone if we had connected with them.
Oh, yeah. Would have been helpful. We love it. We love a savings.
Yep. So just double tapping on that. But let's move into load in and setup. We've touched on it a little bit, but Logan, can you kind of break down those elements?
Yes. Broad strokes, make sure you leave enough time for setup and load in. Like Mary said, it's usually a work backwards game. And you work from the inside out. You kind of know, I want to have a 2-hour luncheon. Okay. When would we need to be out of the space? Okay. And then you could kind of work forward of how long it takes, but making sure that you get accurate estimations of how much time your vendors need to set up. So this is a great thing if you're working with vendors you've worked with before, that you can come to them and say, hey, we get access at 8 a.m. I want a noon start, but I want everything set by 10:30. Is 2.5 hours enough time for you to set everything? And they can give you usually an honest yes or no. I've seen a lot of planners make the mistake where they set these, and if they don't have the experience and know and understand how long some of these elements take, their vendors then are scrambling to get set up in the right amount of time. And again, we're talking about this in this episode because I feel like time is money when you're an event planner. You just want to gift yourself time in any scenario. I so much rather be set and have about 30 minutes of downtime before doors open than be scrambling in the final seconds and maybe even having to push doors or push, registration opening 5 or 10 minutes because we're still getting things set up. I see this a lot too with anyone who DIYs any aspect of their event, whether it's decor, or maybe they're utilizing volunteers to help them with something. Again, like you can pay experienced people to come in and solve this for you, but especially if you're doing anything yourself, DIY, do it yourself, you need to overestimate how much time it takes. There's a reason if you have been a bridesmaid in a wedding, there's a reason hair and makeup people usually make you start at some crazy time like 6 a.m. or 6:30 because they're experienced and they know stuff happens. Someone runs late, then they've buffered some time in to make sure that all 8 of you or 5 of you are ready by, noon or 1 or whatever time. But individually, to me, it feels crazy because it's so early. But as a logistical person, I go, no, that makes sense. They've budgeted buffer time of having to fix something, running to the bathroom, whatever it is to do that. So just make sure you're doing that with your load in and your setup. Mary, how about you? What are some other timing tips?
The set and ready time, as you said, is the most important thing to me when we're talking about time for events, is that set and ready time. So couldn't agree more. In my ideal dream situation, we're set and ready an hour before doors open. That does not happen. But when it does, I'm like, this is going to be a good event. Like we're starting off really strong. And so I completely agree. One other specific thing with load in and setup is if you're working, we talked about vendors, but like exhibitors is another area where I've seen this basically like what we like to do is empower the exhibitors to be able to set up on time. These are usually like sponsors or somebody who has like a booth or something like that or a table at your event. And so we'll say, we need you to be set and ready by 9:30 a.m. because registration starts at 10 and we don't want any setup happening at that time. And so the earliest you can access is 6 a.m. What time are you going to arrive? Basically asking them, like, how much time do you need to set up? And here are the parameters. When we've done it that way, we track to like what time they said they're going to arrive so we can like call them if we don't see them or whatever. But I think we've almost always been set up on time, which is pretty cool. And so I do like the ability to kind of give them accountability, I guess, on when they're going to come. And obviously you have latecomers that you have to deal with sometimes, but I just want to say that as well. We've dealt with that specifically with exhibitors and load in.
And on that, I had a venue that had a very small loading dock. And so we even had to you talk about how many documents you need as things get more complicated. We had to create like a loading dock schedule and specifically ask each vendor what car they were driving. Did they need access to the loading dock? It was also a very old historical venue, which is gorgeous, but logistically it was like to get from loading dock to ballroom was essentially you were walking a city block through corridors and some stairs, and it had multiple lifts. Like it was a very complex loading in and loading out system. And so that was something that we had to think through. And I still don't think we did it until we knew that venue. And now it's just, I always have it in the back of my head. If I have anyone looking at that venue, I'm like, the loading dock, it's a situation. Like you need extra time, which again, usually sometimes extra money for getting things set up. So that's another one. But Mary, talking about registration, what are your tips on timing for registration?
This is kind of just like a small tip. Once you're set and ready, obviously like doors are going to open, registration is going to begin. And then it's thinking through how much time do we need to get everyone through the registration line and how do we try to avoid lines? And that kind of is what helps you determine when you need to open registration and then also the details within that, how many people do you need to have and all of that good stuff. But registration is key because it's one of those things, again, at the beginning of an event that can really mess up your timeline. And so locking in on how long that's going to take and how many people you need to support that will set you up for what's to come. Would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced it as a producer. I had to start a general session late because the lines at registration were so long that the logistics team asked us to hold our stage programming because they wanted to make sure they could get more people in. And then that had the trickle down effect of that, the domino effect of then impacting everything that came after us. And it was because of long lines at registration. And I made notes in my run of show, because I was like, again, it wasn't us, it was someone else. We were ready. But yeah, I would make sure you have the amount of time that you want to get. I think that can impact budget with just how many like check-in stations do you need? Like you said, how many people? Another pro tip for multi-day conferences, you see they often will offer registration the day before programming starts. So maybe the conference starts on Monday, but you can start picking up your badge and checking in on Sunday. And that's just like a nice thing to help take some of the traffic away in those long lines and all the messaging around like get in early, get it early, make sure you pick up your badge early so you don't have to worry about it. Those are just some things to think about. And then just making sure, I just think I feel like the biggest mistake, Mary, I see is people don't put enough time for registration. Like they just think, 30 minutes to get 400 people in a ballroom is going to be enough time. And it just usually isn't. When I've run registration for people, I usually like an hour, no matter the size of the event, unless it was teeny, teeny, tiny. But like anything over 100 people, you should be open an hour early just to accommodate the early birds, have some coffee service available, somewhere for them to hang out. And like you said, if you're ready early, it's always nice to surprise attendees and open 15 minutes early. But I always preach to my volunteers and staff, like, we don't need to feel pressured to start early. We have a start time. As long as we're ready by the start time, we're good. Everything's running on time, but it's a bonus if we were ready and running far enough ahead of things that we could open early and have a positive, just a little magical moment for those attendees of like, oh, thanks. Yeah, I didn't think you'd be open yet, but happy to check you in.
And that kind of transitions into on-site staff timing next. So Logan, what tips do you have for that?
So on-site staff timing, this is one, again, coming from my perspective with usually doing production or registration, just making sure you allocate at least 15 minutes, if not perfect world, it's 30 minutes to the call time, meaning have people arrive 30 minutes before you actually need them to start doing something, even if that's just helping you get set up. In the production world, we usually call this like power up time or work notes time. And it's the idea that, yes, in a perfect world, if you told folks you need to be here at 8 a.m., everybody would be here at 8 a.m. at their seats, ready to start doing things. But just in the reality of us being humans, it's usually not the case. And so I always build into my run of shows and my timelines and my schedules, especially even volunteers, is my call time usually is about 15 to 30 minutes earlier than when I actually need them to buffer time for folks getting situated. They can't figure out parking. They need to go to the bathroom. They want to put their bag away. Like there's so many things. So that's just something like, I feel like it's such a small nuance, but then I hate when you start the day feeling behind. So just give yourself that gift of those 15, 30 minutes of some extra buffer. And if you have a crew that's amazing and all gets there early and gets set, you just get some bonus time to work through things. But what about you, Mary? What else do you have for on-site staff?
Yeah, I grapple with this a lot. I know that's how you like to do it, and it makes perfect sense, especially because I'm one of those people. I've admitted it before. I'm late to everything. Mornings are hard for me. So I've kind of tried to turn into like, I'm going to give the team all the amount of details that I can. Like, here's the parking, here's what we suggest, blah, blah, blah. And like the amount of details in a sense where it's like, you have to be here by this time. Don't be late. And that's coming from me, somebody who's always late. Like, this is your like, no, do not be late past this time. And that's kind of what I've started doing. So really people are getting there maybe like 30 minutes early or something like that. Not really much more. That's working for us right now. We'll see if long term, we need to give folks a little bit more buffer time like you do, Logan. I think yours is the safe, good scenario, and mine is more like I can't ask people to do something I'm not willing to do, and so we do like this last final time. You better be there no matter what type of. So.
And I'm intrigued if you do that more because now you have staff, right? You have folks that you now work with, for a lot of the time, repeat for different events. Versus for me, I feel like a lot of times I'm working with folks I don't know at all, and so I don't know their tendencies. If they are someone who sees a 10 o'clock time and they say, "Oh, she means 10:05." I definitely, for me, it's from my sports background. My coaches growing up would have it that you like, I've analyzed this on myself already in therapy and with friends. I feel like, cause I get really mad about people being late, not externally mad, just internally. It like bothers me in a way that I don't think it bothers most people. And that's cause from sports, it usually meant we had to like run, like we had to do we did like a physical conditioning punishment. If one person was late, we all did it. And if you really had a coach who wanted to really stick it, they don't make the person who's late run. They make them watch everybody else run. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so mad. And especially to me, it's just like, I think it's just a respect thing in my head is where it really comes down to. And so I still set the precedent, I guess, when I say that. I'm not telling folks, hey, it's a 15, 30-minute window. You can get there. It's like, no, the call time is 7. I want to call if you're going to be running later than 7. But I am then giving you time once you're there, to settle in, power up. Again, with production things, it's a lot of times you have to like turn on machines, make sure things are still working, no one unplugged anything overnight. Like that does take time, so that we're all ready at 8:30. Like we've all powered up, everyone's ready to go, they're ready to start pushing buttons and actually, run through the show or do whatever it is we need to do. So I like to allocate for that time. But I see your point too, Mary, where it's like, this is the real time we need you. I think that just, it stresses me out.
I hear that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pros and
then
cons.
pros and cons. And then my own other thing, again, we talk about here on the podcast, like it's a lot of people talk a lot how you start and they forget to talk about how you end. And this is just a big thing for me with onsite staffing, especially if you have a multi-day event. You really don't need to do this if you have a one-day one-off, but if it's a multi-day event, I would make sure you account a little bit time at the end of the day for a debrief, maybe not a full team debrief, but like team leads, if you have multiple elements of your event happening, just to like huddle up and talk before the next day comes. And this is something when I have like a multi-day conference, having like someone from production, someone from operations, maybe even the client, you all just huddle together and it's like, anything we need to address as a group? Were there any updates? Did something change that would impact all of us? Like to save late night emails, late night phone calls, texts, like whatever it is. It's just like, let's just quickly get together, or me saying, hey, doors need to open 45 minutes early. We're ready as a production team. And the ops person was like, oh yeah, we can do that. We just didn't know, just getting all the key people together. I've had a couple projects I've worked on where they don't do that. And I think it's just a miss, because you don't need to have an hour-long meeting. It's like a 10-minute stand-up. They call it a stand-up because you don't actually sit down. You can just stand there and talk. But just saying, let's all huddle up and talk through it.
I love it. That's a great tip for sure, and super important not to forget. But that brings us to the end of this episode. So we are going to have a part 2. The conversation will continue. We have the whole rest of the big chunk of an event to talk through the timing. And so check out our next episode and we will continue the conversation. But before we end this episode today, we have our bonus tip by Logan.
Yes, this week's bonus tip does relate to our topic. This tip is to make sure you organize a pre-event call for your on-site event team. Sometimes you hire people and they're just a day of person, which is great. But I would say even scheduling just a 30-minute check-in virtual call will both help you build, like I said, I have teams that are new to me. So build some rapport with your team, get to know people's names and faces, and also help answer any questions that folks have. We talked about people arriving on time. This check-in call is a really easy way to verbally call out exactly where they need to be, where they can park, all of that good stuff. I also think it's something when you think about accessibility, I do think having a virtual call where maybe you can screen share things and talk and record it maybe and send it to folks who can't make it or want to rewatch it. This really caters to people who have different learning styles. Some people do need to hear information, take it home, process it, and then that helps them retain it, versus on-site day, morning of, you're throwing a bunch of information at them. There's just some people are better in one of the other scenarios, and it doesn't hurt to give folks a chance to hear it once so that when they're on-site, they're hearing it a second time. So just make sure you take some time, set up that pre-event call. Who can make it live is great. Record it, send it to those who couldn't make it. It's like one extra prep thing I always love to do for any event I work.
I love it. Great relevant bonus tip today. Thank you, Logan. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Better Events podcast. We really, really do appreciate you. So if you are loving what you're hearing, don't forget to leave us a review. Send us a review. You can send us words. You can give us 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to us. And please also make sure to send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, anything like that. You can also follow Logan and I directly on LinkedIn. We love to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of the podcast. We will be back with you again next Wednesday.